Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for September 2nd, 2021. Well, there's a lot of loose talk that's continuing around the Afghanistan situation, trying to affix blame, who's responsible for the collapse, who missed the intelligence picture, most of which treats this as though it's something which just happened this last week that would have been preventable had we had a bigger military deployment into Afghanistan. This really misses the whole point, and in fact is designed to block the questions that are necessary to be raised, starting with what do we do next, which is the question that Helga Zepp-LaRouche said should shape the discussion as to what's going on at present. And she suggested that to do that, we have to get to the truth of what happened on 9/11. In 2001, since that was the justification for the long wars that have continued in the Southwest Asia region that just ended last week or this weekend with the withdrawal of the last U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Now that we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, this gives us an opportunity to look at what has been covered up and what actually was the origin of this disastrous deployment. And I'm not talking about what happened last week. I'm talking about a 20-year deployment, which minimally should have ended after the defeat of the Taliban in Afghanistan, which occurred at the end of 2001. So let's take a look at this situation by going back to what Lyndon LaRouche said on January 3rd, 2001. He issued a forecast in a webcast in which he said the Bush administration would carry out a Reichstag fire event, by which he was referring to the February 27, 1933 burning of the Reichstag in Nazi Germany, which was barely 4 weeks after Hitler came to power, which was used as an excuse to impose an emergency decree, the beginning of a total police state crackdown on politics inside Germany. Here's what LaRouche said on that occasion. He said that he expects the use of an event for the Bush administration to adopt, quote, crisis management to prevent itself from being opposed. He said, where members of the secret government, the secret police team, will set off provocations which will be used to bring about dictatorial powers. Remember, this is January 3rd, 2011, before Bush's inauguration. He continued. He said, you will have small wars set off in various parts of the world, which the Bush administration will respond to with crisis management methods of provocation. Now, during the summer of 2001, there were warnings that something like this was happening. These were dismissed by the highest levels of U.S. intelligence, including Michael Hayden, the head then of the National Security Agency, who will show up again in a couple of moments. Now, as 9/11 was occurring, as the events were unfolding on September 11th, 2001, Lyndon LaRouche was being interviewed on KTKK radio station in Salt Lake City by Jack Stockwell, a very prominent talk show host. And as the events were unfolding, they were discussing what was going on. And LaRouche made the following absolutely astute observations. He said, Osama bin Laden will be blamed. And he said, bin Laden is not an independent force. He referred back to the fact that bin Laden's movement, the Mujahideen movement, was backed and funded by the CIA during the operation that was used against the Soviets who invaded Afghanistan in 1979. And the CIA, from even before the invasion, was providing weapons and training to radical Islamicists, which later included Osama bin Laden, and which also included people who became part of the Taliban. And what LaRouche said is, instead, you must investigate high levels of U.S. command to find out who is actually responsible. Instead of doing that, what have we had? A 20-year cover-up. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of this. U.S. Senator Robert Graham, Bob Graham, a Florida Democrat, repeatedly tried to get documents released that were being held by the FBI and the CIA that showed the Saudi role in 9/11. All the alleged hijackers, but one or two, were Saudis. The funding for this was coming from Saudi families, including the family of Prince Bandar, who is the Saudi ambassador to the United States. Graham worked very closely with the families of the victims of 9/11 through legal battles to get these documents released. He went through the FOIA, he went through Senate investigations. And what they found is that the FBI had tens of thousands of documents showing they had been watching the movements of the Saudis, the funds and so on. But these have still not, in many cases, been released. They were sitting in Sarasota, Florida, and Tampa, Florida, in FBI headquarters, unreleasable because of classification concerns. Now, why was this? Well, think about this. What was the Bush family connection to the Saudis? What about Cheney from Halliburton, the vice president, who was one of the most responsible people for not only the war in Afghanistan, supposedly to capture bin Laden, but also the attack on Iraq, which was based on completely falsified documents of so-called weapons of mass destruction. It wasn't just Bush and Cheney who had these connections. Obama maintained the close relationship with Saudi Arabia, as did Donald Trump. Maybe that's why none of these documents relating to 9/11 were ever released. Now, one of the points that should be looked at here is what the top whistleblower from the National Security Agency, Bill Binney, had to say about this. And what I'm about to give you is contained in the full issue of New Federalist, which is put out by the Diane Sayre for Senate campaign. This is the special 9/11 issue. And to get it, you Google Sayre for Senate, you click on campaign updates, and then on New Federalist, and you'll get a 2-page, extensive, thorough report on the cover-up of 9/11. Under the headline, 9/11 was preventable. Now, who said that? Bill Binney, who is the expert in cyber surveillance at the National Security Agency, who had developed something called the Thin Thread Program, which, without affecting the constitutional privacy provisions, would be able to keep very close tabs on cyber activity of targeted networks that could be part of a terrorist operation. Instead, Thin Thread was rejected by then NSA Director General Michael Hayden, who adopted instead a system of universal surveillance, which was later fully exposed by whistleblower Edward Snowden and continues to be exposed by Bill Binney and his collaborators. The metadata collection proposed by Binney would not have violated constitutional privacy protection. But the universal system of surveillance which was put in place is still in place. And Binney said the rejection of his policy, his program, means 9/11 was allowed to occur, which is what LaRouche had said, that whether Dick Cheney himself orchestrated it, there was a decision made to let what warnings were available, indications that were available, to ignore them until after it happened. In other words, a Reichstag fire event was minimally allowed to occur to then impose the Patriot Act and the wars that followed that made the Beltway bandits, the military-industrial complex and its related corporate cartels, filthy rich off the war spending for the last 20 years. Now, one person who's been very outspoken on this is Ray McGovern, a former top CIA analyst, someone who was briefing the president, who was a founder of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. McGovern said that the 9/11 lies the cover-up of what happened on 9/11, directly led to the disaster in Afghanistan. It's obvious, if you just trace it, that we have been in Afghanistan not since 2001, and by we I mean the United States and some of our Western allies, NATO allies, but since the 1979 decision by Jimmy Carter to aid the Mujahideen resistance forces that were in the mountains of Afghanistan, and after the Soviets invaded. That is, we were aiding them before, starting in July 79. The Soviets didn't send their army in until December 1979. We were arming and training and aiding them. And those are the networks that after the Soviet Union left, came to power in Afghanistan as the Taliban, with the bin Laden networks forming the al-Qaeda forces in Afghanistan, while the Taliban was the government. Once they were overthrown, and then 10 years later after bin Laden was killed, why did we stay? Well, this is the question that has to be asked. And if you look at this, you'll begin to get a sense of the importance of going deep down to investigate the security and intelligence community, not just in the United States, but the Allied forces in the Five Eyes, including especially the role played by MI6 and the British. And again, if you want to get this report, go to Sarah for Senate, click on the campaign updates, and then on New Federalist, and you'll see the special issue that her campaign put out. By the way, Diane is running against the deep state senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, in the 2022 election. Now, tomorrow's Friday. I'll take your questions. I hope I've provoked some questions this week with the reporting on the reality behind what happened in Afghanistan. Please send me your questions at harleysch@gmail.com, and I'll see you tomorrow.